Well, hey everybody, welcome to week two. It's great to finally get the quarter going and to hopefully start to feel like you're getting into a rhythm. I want to thank you all for making the effort to make one of the webinars last week. It was great to see your faces in real time, and I look forward to many more opportunities like that with you. I would want to remind you that we have another opportunity for that this Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time when we're going to have our first session with Steve. And you'll recall that that's just an hour that I make myself available for you to come and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. The course content, something about emerging adulthood, your lives, ministry, things that are important to you. And I hope that that just is a great opportunity to touch base with you. For those that find it difficult to make 11 o'clock a.m. on Wednesdays, next month I'm going to move it to Thursdays. I think it's 1 p.m. in the afternoon, again, to give you an opportunity to make those. So again, those are completely optional, but I hope that you'll take advantage of them as it's a chance for us to engage each other. I am super excited about this week too and the opportunities that are going to be ahead of us. I wanted to just give you a couple of other highlights. First of all, you all did the emerging adult quiz, getting your impressions of emerging adulthood. And I went ahead and did a summary form for that results, and I put that in the Explore section in week two. So you can look at sort of the compilation of all the things that you said, and it'll be really interesting for you to look at that. We'll take some time on Wednesday during sessions with Steve to talk about that more specifically and get your impressions of that. But take a look at that data and start to ask yourself some questions like, what does this mean? Why is it that there are some places where our class is pretty much in agreement, and then in other places where you see sort of divergence associated with that? What questions does it raise for you? How might we think about these different statements that were put out there? Now, if you're at all a scholar, you're probably thinking, well, as I answered those, I probably said, well, it depends. It depends on circumstances or people or context, and you are exactly right. But let me just spin this just a little bit and put it this way for you to think about. I believe that all of those statements in that quiz that I gave you are statements that there are people in your church that are trying to answer. Parents that are working and asking you for help for their son or daughter who's in their 20s. Senior leaders who perhaps have looked to you and said, look, you need to crack this nut and figure out what it means to work with young people in our particular context, parachurch, church, education, whatever it might be. You probably have different people with different impressions of how these statements ought to be answered, of whether they agree or disagree or really disagree. And so what's interesting about that is this, is that we all come in our contexts probably with reasons for the answers that we gave. And the trick that we have as scholars and as ministry people is not just to get the right answer, but to actually ask what's informing the answers that people are giving. Why do you think that being a millennial or Gen Z is different than being an emerging adult or the same? Is emerging adulthood a problem today in society or not? What are the reasons that you have for that? What is the data that's backing that up? What is the instances that you're using to draw from that? Who comes to mind as you think about that? You see what happens is that a lot of times it's the things behind our answers that are informing the answers that we have that get superimposed on us. So sometimes it causes us to stop and pause and ask some really hard questions like, what is the reason for that? And what actually am I trying to lead, educate, or pastor someone that's coming at me with certain expectations or impressions about who emerging adults are, or what those millennials are doing, or what are you going to do about Gen Z, right? There's something much deeper and much more profound to that. So I hope that what this quiz does and did for you was not just give you an answer or try to affirm or confirm maybe a narrative that you have, but for all of us to step back and begin to ask, well, what are the reasons for the reasons that I give? What's informing the impressions or perceptions that I have. And this is where education gets hard because in some ways there are going to be things that you're going to read and you're going to be like, I totally resonate with that. And there are other things where you're going to read and you're going to go, I never thought of that, about that before. And that is almost overturning maybe my impressions of what I think it means to be someone living through their 20s and what that means, right? That even came through in some of your definitions of emerging adulthood, which, by the way, were brilliant. I mean, some of them I laughed out loud. I thought they were deep and profound and creative and emotive. Some of you even had a formula. I mean, you guys are the most creative bunch I've ever had. I mean, which is really, really great, right? But I think a deeper question is what does that say about our impressions of emerging adulthood? Is it interesting that some of us answered in the singular about an emerging adult, while others maybe thought about the systemic or the collective nature of what this means? Some of you raised questions about whether this is an American phenomenon or something broader than that. A lot of you talked about this idea of in between. Well, what exactly is in between? And is that an emerging adult's fault or is that society's fault? And how do we know that as well? So even our answers begin to reveal something about our assumptions that aren't necessarily good or bad, but when we're aware of them, we're able to nuance and actually begin to understand perhaps this particular topic a little bit more. And the more that we understand, the better that we can advocate for the people that we care about, right? So super exciting, and I'm just really grateful for the work that you're doing with that. Now, as we move into week 2 here, you're going to hear some more lectures on some really important topics. First of all, beginning to parse a bit what we mean by the difference between Gen Z and millennial and emerging adult, why that's so important, and how do we begin to even talk about this concept of emerging adulthood. We're also going to talk about the importance of race and ethnicity and how that affects even the way we begin to think about this idea of emerging adulthood. And then probably most important, and it really does come out in some of these race and ethnicity articles that I'm having you read, is there is this period called emerging adulthood, right? Which we know from our net, it starts in about 18 and goes up to about 30, right? But just because you fall or a person falls in that range of what would be considered the range of emerging adulthood doesn't necessarily mean that you're an emerging adult. See, you have to identify as an emerging adult. And there are some that would say, I'm 24 and I've reached adulthood. There's others that are 30 and they're saying, I'm not exactly sure yet, right? So we self-identify whether or not we are an emerging adult. And we have to be very, very careful that we don't say, hey, you're an emerging adult. That's not necessarily the case. So part of our job is to give people an opportunity to try to understand this journey that they're on in the third decade of light and see what aspects of it they can really resonate and relate with, because then it gives us a chance to understand them and continue to help and mentor them and encourage them in all aspects of their lives, as we're going to look at in this class. The other lecture that I'm going to have you look at is just to talk a little bit about research. Like, we're going to be looking at a lot of articles that draw from social sciences, right? How do we know a good research article from a bad research article? How do we know that something is more reliable than something is else? How does research differ from, say, Facebook, where everybody's like, you know what, I each just kind of pick my favorite data to reinforce my impressions, and then I'm going to blast it to my friends and then have that conversation, right? That doesn't really go anywhere. And so there's a skill that comes with us actually having to steward the things that we bring to ourselves, and it gives us a chance then to really discern what's maybe better research than others. And that's really important because there are going to be people that are going to be coming to you saying, hey, you know what, I've got this article that came from USA Today. And look, it basically says this about emerging adults. You should really talk about this, right? Well, you have to look at that and discern whether or not it actually is a decent article or not, right? Others are going to come to you and say, look, I need a book, I need an article, I need something for my emerging adult. What would you recommend? And what would you say to them? So part of our job is to begin to curate the things that come our way around the subject so that we can resource others. And that's really the thrill that we have to do that. People are trusting you for that. And so we have to take on that role of discerning really well. So I hope that you have an opportunity to really explore these things and take them seriously. Not only is it something that's going to be interesting for you, but I hope that you see that even as you begin to wrestle with these things, these are just simple and important skills that actually help you serve and people that are interested in emerging adults and advocate for emerging adults as well. And that's pretty cool. So we're here for you. Sarah and I are available to you in any way possible. Have a great week. Hope to see you Wednesday, and may you find great joy in this journey that we're on together. Grace and peace.